All right. So the talk I'm going to give now is an abbreviation actually of one of my level two presentations on adrenal function and how it impacts people with codependency, people who live with those in active addiction. Because we're talking about ongoing stress. And so I'm going to bring up some slides just to help focus this conversation, and because sometimes it's nice to see kind of what I'm talking about. Um, but I won't be going through the entire presentation, just parts of it. So this is actually the first lecture I ever gave on mental health nutrition in 2007. Julie Ross actually asked me to speak for Carolyn Rubin's first conference on nutrition and addiction. And it was a wonderful conference. And because I am a licensed marriage and family therapist and have done a lot of work with people in addicted families, she wanted me to speak on nutrition and families. And so I thought about the impact of ongoing stress, which, of course, anybody living with active addiction, both those who have addiction themselves as well as those who are in close relationships with them, um, it's generally a very stressful, ongoing situation. And I don't know if any of you have worked with codependency or been there yourself, but it can make many of us very rigid, very angry. We end up focusing on the other person rather than on ourselves. We want to fix the other person rather than taking care of ourselves and our own issues. And we can be either blaming or um, shaming, or blaming and shaming ourselves. We can be angry. We can have trouble sleeping because of worry and agitation. And as I was thinking about the typical presentation of somebody with codependency in a therapist's office or in a family, it struck me that these were all the symptoms of low serotonin, and that what is actually going on with family members is less psychological and much more physiological than any of us have ever given it credit for or thought about. And so I developed this talk based on, well, what actually happens to us as the result of trauma, especially the result of ongoing PTSD or ongoing very stressful situations. So there are some very specific, well studied, well known phenomena that occur that has just never been brought into the conversation. And so let's look at that right now. I'm not really going to focus on codependency, but I want to focus on the typical effects of living with addiction or living with chronic stress and trauma. So we have anxiety, depression, rage, we have exhaustion. Often we have insomnia due to a number of different things. We can move into an addictive and compulsive behaviors just to seek relief for ourselves and our own profound distress. We can have chronic or acute stress related illnesses. These include GI issues, back pain, headaches or migraines, allergies, heart disease, chronic fatigue syndrome, fibro, cancer. And I know that, we think of these as stress related illnesses, and we think of stress as emotional. But the reality is that the way stress impacts the body makes these stress related illnesses a normal consequence of how ongoing stress literally impacts the body. and the brain. So this occurs in a couple of very specific areas. First of all, first upregulation and then downregulation of adrenal function, because the adrenals, as well as the neurotransmitters, are what step up to allow us to cope with stress, either in the short term, but also in the long term. And this, in the common parlance, is known as adrenal fatigue, and it leads to both hormone and glandular dysregulation, as well as immune dysregulation. But we also have nutrient and neurotransmitter depletion because, first of all, we use up our nutrients in great big gobs, and we're generally not replacing them effectively. And we are using up our neurotransmitters in great big gobs, but not eating the raw material required for the brain to keep up with the demand. So it's like keeping on withdrawing money out of your ATM machine without putting more money in, right? We get overdrawn. And this explains many of the symptoms, both with people with co-addiction and their resistance to change, but also anybody who is living with chronic PTSD or trying to survive the aftermath of an acute trauma, whether it be a car accident or, anything else. And trauma, of course, takes many, many different forms. So let's start by looking at the adrenal glands. They're part of the endocrine system. They regulate our responses to stress by producing adrenaline and cortisol. Now, they also produce and regulate all of our reproductive hormones and regulate blood pressure. They can become dysfunctional, either overactive or underactive, due to ongoing stress. I'm going to come back to this. So, Dr. Hans Seeley, many decades ago, actually studied this. And he came up with a concept he calls the general adaptation syndrome, which is how the adrenals respond both to acute stress and then ongoing stress. And even though his research was done a long time ago, it was very descriptive and not much has changed in our body's response to stress from when he first started describing it. So, and we'll look at each of these in a little more detail. He has the alarm phase when a stressor has first occurred, which leads to increased cortisol, maybe also norepinephrine and adrenaline. Everything's on. We'll look at what that means in a minute. This is followed by several days of what's called the recovery phase, where we have decreased cortisol. However, if we have ongoing stress, ongoing trauma, ongoing activated PTSD, we move into what's called the phase of resistance, where we have increased cortisol nonstop, which is not supposed to happen. We're supposed to have it on, then off, on, then off. But when we're under ongoing stress, it's just on, and then maybe it's off, and off. Okay, because this can then be followed by what's called the exhaustion phase, which can look like profound depletion of cortisol and can maybe even lead to a medical disorder called Addison's, which is where the adrenals just are no longer producing cortisol. So whenever we have cortisol running, right, and we are in sympathetic arousal, so we have the sympathetic nervous system and the parasympathetic nervous system. The sympathetic nervous system is fight, flight, freeze, and fawn, right? We're trying to protect ourselves, we're trying to survive, right? Followed by, ideally, parasympathetic rest and digest. Now, When we're under the impact of cortisol, however, it does very specific things to the body. We have an increase of blood pressure, heart rate, oxygen intake, and blood flow to muscles because the body is preparing to fight or flee, right? It's preparing to do something. And so we've got increased blood flow, increased heart rate, increased muscle tension, right? We're on. Stored glycogen is released to raise blood sugar because, we need more. Muscle tension increases, we sweat more, but digestion shuts down. Digestive secretions are reduced, right? Because the body's not needing to stop and eat, rest and digest, it's on. Now, the reproductive systems also shut down, right? A lot of the precursors, because all of our adrenal and reproductive hormones are made out of cholesterol. Much of this gets shunted over to make more cortisol. It's called the pregnenolone steal, and less of it goes to the reproductive hormones, which is fine short term. But now think about what happens if all of these things keep going on and on and on, hour after hour, and day after day, and maybe even year after year. But before we get there, we're supposed to move from hyperarousal to hypoarousal. Now, this is disturbing to some people, for instance, after, an exciting wedding or an exciting graduation or an exciting vacation or an exciting something. And then a couple of days later, you're just like, blah, really? Anticlimactic, no energy. Maybe you're a little depressed. Maybe you're a little negative, and this seems really weird. And maybe you can go into some self attack or shame about it. Reality, this is just physiology. This is just what happens. And it's a signal to you that you actually need to rest. You actually need to, just settle down for a little bit, move into self care, move into low impact fun, right? And recover. But here's the resistant reaction. Here's where many of us live and many of our clients live. So if arousal to stress continues, your adrenals will continue to manufacture cortisol. So we saw what this did in the short term. What does this do in the long run? Right? In the long run, we may end up with weight gain around the middle. We may end up with increased appetite, sugar or caffeine craving, infectious illnesses, because at first, cortisol can improve our immune system, and then after time, it impacts and lowers our immune responsiveness. So we're more susceptible to infectious illnesses, even cancer. We have anxiety and depression, high cholesterol and high triglycerides, right? We're actually moving into metabolic syndrome because of the impact of cortisol on everything. We have a tendency to get a second wind in the evening and insomnia or becoming wide awake in the middle of the night, but we have less cortisol in the morning. So it's flipped. Cortisol is supposed to be high in the morning, low at night, so we can sleep. What happens with ongoing stress is that this flips, and you can see it on cortisol saliva tests, where it's now low in the morning and high at bedtime. We have blood sugar swings and diabetes because, the body is still pumping out sugar to help us, fight or flee. We have muscle aches and pains and physical tension because our body's still on, right? We're hyper vigilant, we're hyper aroused, we're looking around for danger, we're trying to stick our finger in the next hole in the dike. So we end up with high blood pressure. And then digestive problems, because, again, the blood flow is being shunted away from digestion and reproduction. So women are going to have harder periods, you're going to have harder perimenopause, harder menopause, because things are so out of whack. And then digestive problems, heartburn, bloating, gas, diarrhea, etc. Now, many of these physical symptoms are going to lead somebody to go to a chiropractor, go to a doctor, go to a therapist, maybe. But unless somebody's really educated, most medical professionals don't stop and ask, tell me about the stress in your life. What's actually going on? What's the background here? And this, if they did that, then this whole picture would come out. So, what are the signs and symptoms, therefore, of full blown adrenal fatigue, exhaustion, when this just keeps going, going, going? The adrenals finally do something called down regulation. They adapt to this by becoming less active. It's like the brain says, you're pumping out so much cortisol. Let's slow things down here. So, difficulty getting up in the morning, often not followed by a second wind at night. So, continuing fatigue not relieved by sleep, craving for salt or salty foods or for sugar. Symptoms increase if meals are skipped, so more reactive hypoglycemia, but lethargy and difficulty doing everyday tasks, decreased sex drive, depression, and apathy, right? So, full blown hypoarousal, hyperarousal, hypoarousal, right? But this can lead to difficulty making decisions and thinking clearly, a decreased ability to handle stress, much slower recovery time from illness, injury, or trauma. So, more frequent illnesses. Now, this can also mean lightheaded when standing up quickly, but we have decreased productivity and the memory is less active. When I was an active psychotherapist, I had to put several of my clients on short term disability leave for precisely this reason, because people just couldn't function at work anymore. I want to go back and look at what is it that we do in our lives that supports this um, adrenal dysfunction. Well, lack of sleep. Now, this can be because we're so activated that we can't sleep and our serotonin's so low that we just stay up worried. But it can also be that we don't prioritize sleep and we don't prioritize self care because we're so busy trying to manage the situation and fix the situation, right? That we're not taking care of ourselves. And a full blown codependency, part of my definition of codependency is loss of a sense of self, loss of boundaries, and profound loss of self care. So, lack of sleep, poor food choices, using food and drinks as stimulants when tired rather than real food, staying up late even though fatigued, constantly in a position of feeling powerless, constantly driving yourself, right? Not allowing yourself downtime, recovery time, trying to be perfect and hold everything together, staying in no win situations over time, lack of enjoyable and rejuvenating activities because you can't relax or you don't have time or you don't dare or you don't deserve it, constant fear, lack of opportunities to relax and feel safe, and hypervigilance. So when you're working with somebody who is in ongoing adrenal stress, ongoing trauma, or in full-blown adrenal fatigue, you really need to be identifying and addressing these behaviors, these situations, and working with them with your clients. This is the psychosocial leg of the stool, right? This is the spiritual leg of the stool, but this matters too. But getting back to the physiological legs of the stool. Um, we have nutrient depletion as one of the physiological effects of ongoing stress. So when we're under stress, our bodies draw from our stores of neurotransmitters and nutrients in order to keep up with the extra demands. And if we are not constantly resupplying the crucial nutrients, and who of us, when we're under, profound stress and trying to hold it all together, or in a activated PTSD episode, who of us stop and eat and feed ourselves? Not very many. So we become depleted, leading to physiological and emotional breakdown. In addition, as we saw, adrenal stress may lead to impaired digestion and absorption. So even if we do manage to eat real food, we're not absorbing it, we're not digesting it, we're not getting the nutrients from it, which we need. So this further decreases our nutrient and neurotransmitter stores. And then we have neurotransmitter depletion. Now, those of you who've studied with me understand this, so I'm just going to go through it briefly. But, we have our four main neurotransmitter systems, all of which are called upon when we're under stress. So the catecholamines, which include dopamine and norepinephrine, give us energy, focus, drive, motivation, right? The sense of, let's go for reward, let's try to fix things. Um, this is our get up and go. This includes adrenaline. We have serotonin, which gives us social skills, allows us to flow with stress, allows us to trust and relax rather than, be agitated and worried and anxious and what's going to happen next. Okay. And it turns into melatonin, so it allows us to relax and to sleep. The endorphins give us emotional and physical pain relief. They are our internal opioids. And so we use them to mediate pain so that we can keep going. And then GABA gives us physical and emotional relaxation and calm. So if these are all depleted, what happens? Well, we lose our get up and go. We get stuck in chronic worry, agitation, the need to be perfect. This is a low serotonin symptom. Rigidity and unwillingness to change, all low serotonin. We end up feeling acutely our emotional and physical pain, or we just completely go numb. And then our muscles are tight, right? GABA relaxes our muscles. But if we've used up all of our GABA, it's like, right? And we can't sleep because we can't physically relax into sleep. And I could say much more about all of these, but this is just an overview. So, what do we want to do about this? Well, the first step is education. We want to educate our clients, maybe ourselves, about hypoglycemia, about the need to keep blood sugar stable. One of the things that literally upsets me about the somatic approaches to psychotherapy, right? I love them. I think they're wonderful. I think that, we all probably need to engage in and learn about somatic psychotherapy. It talks a lot about how trauma is stored in the nervous system, is stored in the muscles. So we can't use talk therapy to overcome trauma. We have to actually get into the level of the nervous system and the muscles. And they talk a lot about resourcing the nervous system. How can we resource the nervous system? And there's many, many, many ways to do it. But what they never, ever talk about is resourcing the nervous system by keeping blood sugar stable, by eating, how the nervous system can become even more dysregulated if we skip meals or eat high sugar meals, and blood sugar drops dramatically, and then adrenaline kicks in. And of course, we already have enough adrenaline running around. We don't need more. Um, and sometimes just feeding people in crisis can be so helpful. Many of you may remember the story of a client, brand new client of mine. She walked into my office and she was shaking, hyperventilating, and wailing. She just sat down and started wailing and said, I think I need to go to the emergency room. Um, she hadn't been able to keep food down for 3 days. She was so upset. So, I would feed her, except she was just going to throw it right up. So, what did I do? I gave her the amino acid glutamine to feed the prefrontal cortex. We do this when blood sugar drops to buy time. So, I gave her 1,000 milligrams of glutamine. I gave her 200 milligrams of 5-HTP to feed the depleted serotonin system because she was so worried. She just couldn't, she was in this frantic, worried loop. Um, and I gave her 200 milligrams of theanine to calm down all of her stress hormones. And within 10 minutes, she was breathing normally. She was no longer hyperventilating. She could feel her body. See, I couldn't do any normal stress relaxation stuff because she was just, there was no way she could access it. Um, so after about 10 minutes, she was able to breathe. She was able to feel her body. She was no longer wailing. She was no longer shaking. We could have an actual conversation and do some resourcing exercises. And then after about half an hour, I got a pre-made protein shake and asked her to slowly sip it through a straw. And she was able to get about half of it down in the rest of the session without throwing it up. So these tools are amazing. But education, hypoglycemia, the need to feed the brain to improve coping abilities, the relationship between stress and illness, especially the physiological, adrenal awareness, and then healthy meal and snack planning and troubleshooting. We want to make it user friendly. So, any questions or comments before I go on at this point?
Hmm.
I have
What
one
is
question.
honest information?
Yeah, Christine, I'm interested in the possibility of someone sort of becoming like addicted to the hyper aroused state. Because you mentioned like that wedding example, and I thought that was very fascinating that someone might feel just kind of disturbed or off once that kind of stress of the or the high of the stress comes down.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I mean, is that fair to say that someone can sort of become addicted to their own propensity to be on high alert?
Absolutely. And these tend to be people who are genetically low dopamine and need ongoing stimulation in order to feel alive and be even normally activated. And these are the people who, um, seek out danger, your adrenaline junkies, right? Your people who have high stress, high dangerous jobs. So, yes. And, think of some of your first responders. But the problem is you can't live there. You still actually have to stop and recuperate and recover because otherwise you are actually going to burn yourself out. And bringing in the amino acid tyrosine for people who want to maintain this hyper state will allow people to be able to um, tolerate a less hyper state while still having enough dopamine around to feel alive. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it certainly does. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, let's move on then. Testing can be useful. Doing a 4-point adrenal test. There's a number of different labs that will give you that. So you're testing it upon arising around noon, around 4 o'clock, and before bed. I like the diagnostic test for adrenal stress index, the ASI, but there's lots of other ones out there. Um, there's a book called The Role of Stress and the HPA Axis in Chronic Disease Management by Thomas Williams, if you're interested in going into this in much more intense detail. This is a very biochemically intense book, not for beginners. So you see, this is the diagnostics, the normal curve. Cortisol is supposed to be high in the morning, low at bedtime. People under chronic cortisol output, you may have, it's high in the morning and stays high all day, or it moves to low in the morning and then bumps up and is high for the rest of the day. So you can have all sorts of pictures. You can also have it flatlined where it's just flat and it's not, the body's still producing cortisol. So it's not that you have Addison's disease and the endocrinologist is just going to wash his hands of you. Um, I could tell you a client story about this if we have time. Um, but in terms of enough cortisol to function, you're not making it. And this is where bringing in, a glandular can be extremely useful. We'll talk about that in a minute. So we want to make our supplementation user friendly. So address adrenal gland health using adaptogenic herbs, ginseng, eleuthero, some of the others. We have both calming as well as activating herbs. Adrenal supporting nutrients include salt. Now, one of the things I just found out that I did not know is that when people are under ongoing stress for a long period of time, they're activated and hypervigilant for a long period of time, it can actually drop your sodium and your potassium to very low levels. This is actually happening to my sister right now. And I just had a hair mineral test done. And when I talked to the consultant, I asked her about, what causes very low sodium other than tumors. And tumors were ruled out in the case of my sister. And the lady said, high ongoing stress will tank your sodium and potassium. Um, so making sure there's enough salt in the diet. This is where salt's needed. Vitamin C, B5, B6, a few others. Glandulars and hormones. And if we need to lower cortisol at bedtime, we like theanine and phosphatidylserine or Serifos. Rather than me going into chat, do you want to just ask your question? What did you just post in chat?
She asked about electrolytes. So yes, using electrolytes can help with
Yes,
the
you,
sodium, potassium, and so on.
yep. This is a really good time to increase your electrolyte intake. Thank you, Damir. There's also a product from the UK that I really like. Can't remember the name of it. Let's see if I can find it here. But the company is Regenerative Nutrition, and they have a adrenal formula that actually contains low dose cortisone, which can keep you functioning I'll come back around to the story that can keep you functioning until your adrenals are functioning themselves again. Phosphatidylserine, either in the seriphos form, phosphorylated serine, or just by itself, has wonderful functions for all sorts of things, including reducing the subjective measures of stress and anxiety, blunting the cortisol response so you're not just pounding out cortisol, but it can be more evenly gradated. Okay, so phosphatidylserine appears to normalize cortisol levels. And, some of you can take a picture of this if you want. These are adrenal adaptogenic herbs that are balancers. Some just balance, some are a little more energizing, some are a little more calming and should be taken before bed. And then we want to support the neurotransmitter system as needed using amino acids. We love our aminos. And one of the reasons we love aminos is because we get to empower and educate our clients to care for their own brain and body as needed. They're anti-addictive. You need less over time rather than more. They're cheap and they're fast acting. They're also a whole lot safer than antidepressants. And then we want to supplement food-based nutrient intake to counteract this subclinical malnutrition. We want people to be reaching for real food rather than junk food, but because people are usually and often too overwhelmed and exhausted to cook or shop effectively, you can use one of the meal services if you have the money. Protein drinks and bars that are pre-made, green drinks, extra vitamins and minerals is needed. And you want to be brainstorming and troubleshooting with your clients, both what do they actually need, but also to help them ensure compliance. Now, sometimes extra testing is useful to find out what's actually getting depleted so that you can engage in what's called precision medicine and supplement and target what is actually needed. And then you want to support sleep because when people following either an acute trauma or ongoing stress and trauma, people can have serious issues with insomnia. And so you need to spend time to identify the causes of insomnia so intervention can be targeted effectively. The first is to rule out actual danger and realistic fear. If you are living with somebody who has active addiction going on, that person may not actually be safe. That person may come in to the house at 3 o'clock in the morning, rip-roaring drunk, or speeding on meth, and be dangerous. So you want to help your clients create a safety plan. And then you want to practice self-care through prayer, thought-stopping techniques, relaxation, and problem solving. And then we want to replete the depleted neurotransmitters. And so for anxiety and obsessive thinking that's keeping you awake, you want to bring in serotonin support. For muscle tightness and tension and restlessness and muscle pain, you want to bring in GABA and magnesium. So again, spending time to identify the causes so intervention can be targeted effectively. You may need to supplement with extra magnesium and occasionally calcium before bed to reduce muscle tension and restlessness. Drink high mineral sleep promoting herbal teas such as chamomile, avena, sativa, passion flower, hops, and there's some others as well.
Excuse me,
Um,
can you
yeah.
go more into magnesium What kind of magnesium? Magnesium glycinate, magnesium, you know what I mean. Not
Well, I do know,
magnesium oxide, I'm
I,
saying.
I do know what you mean. One of the things that can happen under chronic stress is that people get constipated or have alternating constipation and diarrhea because, there's just not enough blood flow to the digestive system and it shuts down. And so, while typically I would recommend magnesium glycinate because it doesn't lead to loose stools the way magnesium citrate does. If people are experiencing constipation as a result of the stress and trauma, bringing in magnesium citrate before bed can be very useful, both to help sleep, but also to help lower your constipation risk. There are other forms of magnesium that can be useful as well, but we don't need to go into those right now. And then high cortisol, often cortisol is running at bedtime. Sometimes because your blood sugar's dropped, but often just because it's running high at bedtime. And you can use the saliva test to determine this. So you can do relaxation exercises, self-hypnosis tapes. But in terms of supplements, we want to bring in theanine, phosphatidylserine, perhaps in the form of seraphos, and herbs like ashwagandha, holy basil, jujube dates, etc. Gaia Herbs has a series of adrenal herbs for whatever ails you, and I highly recommend them. And then lack of sleep hygiene. This is where it's important to make time for self-care, not just on. Okay, jump into bed. Now it's time to sleep. Really? And you're staring at the ceiling. You're exhausted, but you're wired, but tired. So creating a sleep ritual. Our brain and bodies need time to transition from being on during the day to sleep. And sleep also needs a sense of safety. So, creating a sleep ritual that will help you relax and signal that it's bedtime. Relaxation tapes, prayer, safe place for visualization, a warm bath, especially with nice smelling things in it, you know, things that you do the same before bed every night, and then make sure that you're not just, falling asleep on the sofa but that you're actually going to bed and you're in a nice, dark, cool enough room. So you also want to avoid electronics mostly before bed. People who are working shifts, need to have a slightly different strategy. And then we may need to address physical pain. And so, because pain can keep us awake at night as well. So you want to address the physiologically based pain and inflammation. We've got amino acids for that. We've got herbs for that. You want to support digestion to relieve heartburn. Um, and then we want to reduce inflammation. And again, we've got herbs and nutrients to reduce inflammation that can help take the edge off pain. So that is the overview of my presentation. Questions, comments, personal experiences. And again, after that, I'll share one of my stories.
Yeah,
What's your
Christine,
response? Yeah, go on, TJ.
I'm curious if somebody's at the point of extreme adrenal dysregulation and they have kind of chronically low cortisol levels,
Mm-hmm.
um, is there any risk or is there any ideal way of timing the use of things like seraphos or phosphatidylserine or even theanine so to not drop that even further? Like maybe I'm assuming you
Well, then you
do that
don't need
closer to
those.
bedtime.
Yeah, I mean, if you don't have cortisol running at bedtime, then you don't need those, or you need them in lower doses,
That makes sense.
right? Right. But what happens a lot is people's cortisol is low during the day and then pops at bedtime.
Right. So
And
getting that
that's
switch.
right. And that's where we need to switch things back. And you can switch things back by using activating herbs in the morning to kind of signal to the brain that hey, it's actually time to function now. And then the calming herbs at bedtime.
Thank you very much.
What's your response to this? Do you relate to it? Do you have clients who you can think of in this situation? How many of these tools have you used in your own practice? Susan,
Morning,
good morning.
Christiana. Can you hear me? I wanted to ask question on DHEA. What is
Hmm.
the actual range?
So
The
DH,
actual range you can look up to. Some people don't. If you ask them, do they have stress? They might deny it, but test result often shows that they are having stress. So, what are this range you will look out for? The range of this
so
DHEA. And
right. So
secondly, there was something I read some time ago that if you're under stress, that stress is on your bloodstream, that you have to move around, walk around, that as you're walking around, that you're releasing those stress. So I want to confirm how true this thing is. Yeah, it's not a research, but somebody just said it in a program that if your nervous system is high as a result of stress, that stress concentrates in your bloodstream, that what you will do is you walk around.
okay.
So,
So when we say stress is concentrating in your bloodstream, what we're talking about is adrenaline and cortisol.
okay,
And that one way to help drop the levels is actually express it physically. So going for a run, going for a brisk walk, can help, work those hormones out of your body. Now, the other, side of that is just to physically calm down, which will stop the production of them. And that's where a slow meditative walk is useful.
okay,
Um, and where you're actually feeling your feet on the floor, and it's actually bilateral stimulation walking, right? So it's a form
okay,
of EMDR, and it can be very useful to calm and bring you back into regulation. Walking is one of the best stress management tools we have, but we want to do it mindfully and meditatively. Now, your first what what was uh, um, what was your first question again, Susan?
the range for the
Oh,
DHEA.
DHEA. Right. So DHEA is one of the mother hormones for our reproductive hormones, but it can also switch back down over to making cortisol. It can get very depleted, especially if our precursor hormones, pregnenolone and 7 hydroxyprogesterone, are going down the cortisol pathway rather than the reproductive hormone pathway. So DHEA can get low. You actually want to test it before supplementing for it. Um,
Okay,
Women need less DHEA than men do because it can turn into testosterone really easily in both men and women, and too much testosterone in women we don't like. So the recommended dose for women is generally 5 to 10 milligrams a day. For men, it can be 25. For somebody in really real adrenal fatigue, say a woman whose DHEA is very depleted. You can use the higher dose, absolutely, 25 for a month or two, and then you want to bring it down to a lower maintenance dose.
Okay. So what about the test result? Is there any range you look up to?
Um,
Or is the test result will just test positive or
there,
negative?
yeah, in this case, I would probably just use the conventional ranges for normal. I can't remember what normal DHEA is right now, but the labs will tell you.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. So I had a client a while back. He was actually in my church, and his wife referred him to me because she was really, really worried. And when I first met with him, he was working. He had done three tours of combat duty in one of the wars and had come back been back home for a year. He came back to a wife and a toddler daughter and went into a very high stress sales job in a tire shop. And what finally happened is that he just collapsed at work. Um, and I did the adrenal test, and he was flatlined, and he was also turned out gluten sensitive and very, very, very gluten sensitive. He could hold a pizza box and he would get a gluten reaction just from the flour on the box. And so I referred him to an endocrinologist because I didn't know then what I know now. And it scared me. And I thought, oh, this is way outside my scope of practice because he got to the point where he couldn't get out of bed. He couldn't walk. He would get dizzy. He couldn't ride a bicycle. He couldn't drive. And so I referred him to an endocrinologist who did his testing and determined that things were functioning and maybe not functioning very well, but doing what they were supposed to do in the testing. And so, not within his scope of practice. And he said, yes, I know you can't get out of bed, but you're just fine, adrenal wise, and sends him home. Well, so he's back in my lap. So I just, go find resources. And he denies having PTSD from combat. It turned out he was living in so much PTSD, he didn't even realize that it wasn't normal. He was living in so much reactivity, what we finally discovered. So I used a supplement that was available then that is not available now. It had well, it didn't. It was called Isocort, and it was taken off the market by the FDA, probably because it did have cortisone in it. And it got him out of bed and functioning. Now I would use the product from the UK that has 5 milligrams of hydrocortisone in it. That's low enough that it's not going to create more atrophy of the adrenals, but high enough that it can get people functioning. But you can't buy that in this country without prescription, but you can buy it from the UK. Regenerative Nutrition is the name of the company. And then I got him on herbs, and we little by little by little got him functioning and got him. He did end up on long-term disability, but we got him functioning and discovered that he really did have PTSD. And so, we're doing a lot of trauma therapy. And so all 3 legs of the stool really did work. But he had to keep his stress very, very, very low. Okay. Any questions or comments before we stop for the day?
Hi, Christina. I'll comment.
All right.
I love everything. I'm been missing these calls and really glad to be here.
I'm so
Because
glad you're here.
because I've lived all of this and now regulated and, gone through it all and working with a lot of people in 12-step community who have all of these issues and are overly medicated on medications.
Mhm.
But the eating, I'm the people I'm working with, I'm really, focusing on the food and the protein and the hypoglycemia. But sleep is such an issue with this medication deal and, introducing all of the supplements and the calming herbs at night. And, the overlap with the sleep medication is difficult.
It is difficult.
They don't want to come off the sleep meds. They're afraid.
Well, they are afraid. And I think what you can do is get people's hormones and stress level regulated during the day.
Okay.
And if you can regulate it during the day, it is actually going to carry over to bedtime.
Okay.
And then people are going to find that they're sleeping better anyway. And then you can talk to them about talking to their doctor or doing it on their own if they want to do so. Not coming off the sleep med, but lowering it.
Right.
Seeing if they can very slightly, because you don't want to cold turkey off most of these sleep meds anyway,
No.
right?
Right.
So see if they can drop it by 10%. And
Okay.
maybe bring in, something like theanine or GABA, which is safe,
Right.
with most sleep meds, right?
Yeah.
Um, and then see how they do. And then, they can think about dropping it by another 10%.
Okay.
And, generally the idea of dropping something by 10% is not scary to people,
Right. Yeah.
right? And
Right.
especially if they are doing so much better during the day,
Yeah.
they will be going into bedtime with less anxiety, with less
Okay.
residual anxiety, right?
Yeah. Right. A lot of people, well, especially here in Canada, don't have doctors that we know don't understand anything,
Right.
but some of them don't even have doctors that, they can even go to. So yeah, I think what you're saying is to work on the daily routines and then as they trust more, start to drop that by 10%. That's, yeah. And the L-theanine
Exactly.
and GABAs, yeah, I'm using that a lot with them at night. And I just came across an app called Insight Timer. I don't know uh, how come I didn't know about this, but I mean, it is about $7 a month, but it has all these meditations and these calming
Nice.
yeah, it's really good. And
Yeah, there's another one called Calm Sleep
okay.
that I really like as well. So there are
Okay.
some really good apps out there. There's also free things
Free
out
things.
there.
Yeah. True.
Yeah.
Right.
But
Okay.
sleep hygiene, really getting people into a good regular sleep hygiene habit
Right.
also helps them get into bed um, um, ready for sleep. Now,
Right.
I've had a lot of sleep issues the last several years, and I'm finally beginning to get it under control. One of the things that really helped for me is this black thing on my chair you can see in the back there. The company is Huga, and it's a PEMF frequency mat. And you can set it for whatever you want. You can set it to wake up and help focus more, but you can also set it for sleep to help generate alpha and theta um, brain waves to encourage deeper sleep. And before I started using it, I was getting 15 minutes of deep sleep at night, which is nowhere near enough. And the first night I started using it, it moved to an hour of deep sleep.
Wow. Wow.
So sometimes bringing in,
Yeah.
things can be helpful as well.
Right. Right. I do have a frequency little machine. I haven't noticed a lot of results. It's called Calmidity, and it's a little frequency machine, and you can put it beside you, and it has earphones with all those deep sleep frequencies. So that's really, yeah, I'd like to know more about yours, because this is something people can use that's not going to harm them at all, and they don't have to worry about, like with their medications. So, and chronic pain. Do you ever use DLPA at night or not?
Well, you're not going to use DLPA at night because
No.
the L-phenylalanine can be activating,
Okay.
but you can certainly use the D-phenylalanine at night to
Okay.
lower your pain awareness.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah.
Good.
And there's other things as well.
Right. Okay. That's amazing that you got those results. Wow.
Yeah, made me happy.
Yeah. Thanks, Christina.
You're welcome. All right, good seeing
And
everybody.
yes, I wanted to
Okay,
say
one
something
last
that
question.
in your book, hello, Ma, can you hear me?
Mhm.
In your book, they can also get your book because there's a self-care for sleep. Things you can do. Yes, yes, yes. So I recommend that book
Yes,
to her if she can get it for her clients. There's a simple strategies that can enable you to sleep, things that can calm you down before sleep. I think this book can really help.
thank you. And by the
Yes.
way, Lori, why don't you put your book up? Lori just published a wonderful book about her own journey into healing, and I highly recommend it for everybody.
Oh, thank you, Christina. I'll put it in the chat. Yes, it's called Born Addict, and your copy is coming. And between, your book, Eat, has just been such a resource, and like feeding recovery meetings have been pretty cool to have here in Canada. We've had a
Well, I'm
few.
so glad you're doing them.
Yeah, we've had, I had like 6 to 8 people, but they were just blown away because they have no information on any of this, right? On how to
No,
eat.
right, right.
So they've been fun to have, like pepperoni and different foods, their little snacks and nuts, and they just think that's so fun, right?
Yeah.
But
So
thank
Josh
you.
and TJ, because I know you're interested in setting up your own feeding recovery meetings in your communities. Lori's been doing it in her community in Canada. And it sounds like it's been working out wonderfully.
Yeah, it's I'm trying to get it into a recovery house, but it's very hard to convince or not, or like you just have to do the right presentation, and I'm working on that because I think they
It
know
takes
what's
time.
not working. Yes. So
Right, right. I find actually the recovery peers are much more open to this information than like addiction counselors.
yes. Yeah.
So
Because they're all living in high anxiety and hypoglycemia. So when you
Mhm.
actually feed them and you watch it, they can see the change and feel the change. You know,
you sure can.
yeah.
I have a question about 4 hours feeding and so on. Because I'm on a ketogenic diet, there is no need to
No,
intake.
the keto, right. The ketogenic diet can maintain blood sugar levels for much longer. That's
Yeah.
absolutely true.
And I'm waking up with high cortisol, so I have a panic attacks every morning.
Ooh.
So I'm using L-theanine 5-HTP to calm down. Yeah.
Well, that's
Uh,
good. But what's your blood sugar in the morning? Because damn
um,
Mary, your blood
low.
sugar, yeah, you see, you may be having
4.7. It's okay. So my blood sugar is okay. Yeah. It's in
yeah,
a normal range. Yeah.
you may also want to see what glutamine does. All right, ladies and gentlemen, we got
Okay.
to run. So
Thank you
nice
very
seeing you
much. Yeah.
all.
I
Bye bye.
wish you all the best. Yeah.
Yes,
Bye bye.
thank you. Thank you.
Thank
Thank
And
you.
this is
Bye-bye.
you.
recorded.